All right. Yeah, I think so, yeah. You clicker. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to this very complex panel on complexities, right the way after lunch, just to keep everyone awake. So the title of the session is Responsible Recruitment, Understanding and Managing Regional Complexities. And we all know that global supply chains span geographic boundaries, and as part of their due diligence, it's really important to understand where risk may lie for business operations. And to be effective, that risk assessment must include both a sort of wider geopolitical analysis and clear understanding of what the impacts of that are for on the ground for workforces, including migrant workers. In this session, we're going to have a closer look at three particular locations or recruitment corridors. And so we hope that this is interesting from a location point of view, that you'll find out more about Myanmar, Taiwan and the Gulf, but also help to sort of demonstrate and show where a deeper understanding of the operating context is a vital part of company due diligence. So I've got three great panelists here. Thi Then is Senior Consultant at the Myanmar Centre for Responsible Business, one of IHRB's sister or partner organisations. And she's obviously going to be talking about Myanmar migrant workers around the world. We have our question moderator, Bonnie Ling, who's also, when she's not working with us, is the Executive Director of Work Better Innovations. And Bonnie is Taiwanese and is going to be talking to us about the situation of Taiwan. And then we have at the end Tamara Dewberry, who is Gulf Sustain Manager for IHRB, so IHRB's expert of everything to do with the Gulf. So, Thi, I'm going to start with you first of all. As we all know, the tentative steps that Myanmar have been making towards a more democratic form of government, and that had been accompanied by sort of significant investment in the country by companies, but this was all halted by the military coup that took place in 2021. And the impact of that on the Myanmar economy has been dramatic, with many high-profile companies halting operations in the country. And that's what a lot of business and human rights focus has been on. Should I stay or should I go? You know, that's been the conversation. But the inevitable consequence of the situation in Myanmar is that many workers have been forced to leave the country to find employment in a wide range of other countries, but particularly in neighbouring Thailand. Now, I know that you're going to give us an overview of what you see happening in the region.
Thank you, Neil. Can you hear me?
Yep. And I think slides are going to come up.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Thi Then, and thank you, Neil, also. So, Myanmar is actually a country, as you know, in Southeast Asia. We're actually one of the main countries of origin of migration. And most of the Myanmar migrant workers, when they go abroad, the destination countries are Thailand, which is a neighboring country of Myanmar. We have about 70% of Myanmar labor migrants who go to Thailand, whether it's legally or undocumented. And then other main destinations of migration for Myanmar migrant workers are to Malaysia, and then also to Singapore, China, as well as to Korea, Japan, and also to the Middle Eastern countries such as the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and we're also seeing workers going to Oman more recently. So the drivers of migration. Of course, the livelihood and economic factors, they remain as the main reason for migration. Of course, this is also combined with a poor economic outlook, looking at now with more factory closures, disruptions to trade, power shortages, and also there's an inflation which raises the prices of commodities for families in the country. And we have, of course, the insecurity and the ongoing conflict in the country, and more recently, since February, also the fear of conscription. So when we're looking at the legal migration routes, we have the MOU system, but also mainly to Thailand, particularly in Thailand, because we also share our borders with. We have what is called the Cabinet Resolution for National Verification process, and this is known as the pink card route, which means that this is how migrant workers regularize themselves having come across from Myanmar to Thailand. There's also other forms of MOU, such as the border employment for seasonal work, and also more recently we are seeing workers migrating to China to work. And we're also seeing this more in the manufacturing sector. For example, we have Myanmar workers in the garment factories in Myanmar who are now migrating to Thailand to work in garment factories over there, which means that they can continue to use their skill sets and they also paid a better job, paid a better pay. Just to say that Myanmar has also participated in the 7th Abu Dhabi Dialogue Ministerial Consultation in February, where the State Administration Council's Ministry of Foreign Affairs had announced that efforts are underway to send Myanmar migrant workers to the Middle East as well. And here, another point to make is that where there are legal migrants, there are more numbers of illegal Myanmar undocumented workers abroad as well. Just to touch base on the issues, situations related to the passport, taxation, and remittance. So the passport process, applying the passport process in Myanmar, or even reapplying for a passport process in Myanmar can be a lengthy one. Sometimes it can take up to 6 months before you get an appointment. And of course, it is a complex process and tends to be involved with also with corruption. Of course, and since September last year, we're also seeing that passport renewal of labor migrants who are abroad who want to renew their passports. Now they have to also provide evidence of a 2% income tax that they have already paid the income tax. There are also new instructions and regulations coming underway. For example, last month, there was an instruction to the recruitment agencies where workers between age of 23 to 31 should not be signed for the worker contract when they want to go abroad. But then that instruction has backtracked. And then earlier this month, there was also an instruction where because when workers leave the country, we have 9 different types of passports. And when the workers leave the country, they have what is called the PJ passport or the job passport. So because sometimes it is more difficult for workers who want to start leaving the country to acquire a job passport with other necessary documents. What is happening is that people are actually leaving with a visit passport and then trying to work in the destination country and getting a work permit over there. So what's happening in the earlier of this month is that there has also been prohibition of job passports being conversion to visit passports as well. And then looking at the rules on income tax, well, there has been a recent introduction of old provisions that actually allows Myanmar to tax overseas workers, and that is for the workers a flat rate of 2%. So, but if the workers in a foreign country, if they are also paying domestic tax to the host country, then that can also be offset. Looking at more on remittances, there's also the question of the requirement of whether workers abroad have to send 25% of their income to their families in Myanmar, and whether through the obligation, through the banking systems to send to Myanmar. So this is to their families. But then still up to date, how this will be implemented and how it will be enforced is still unclear. So there's still a lot of instructions, but also unclear enforcements in place as well. Challenges are many. Of course, when we look at the drivers to leave the country to work abroad, the vulnerabilities at home, the drivers become also the vulnerabilities, also the drivers of migration. But here I also wanted to highlight, if you can look at the bottom left side, you'll see some numbers with Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, and etc. So in fact, that's the approved fee, which the Myanmar agencies can charge in the country. So this is for, so depending on the country and depending on the level of skilled labor job that you are requiring, there's a difference in terms of the charge. But this is only for the recruitment charges. In reality, for charge of the financial cost of migration is much bigger, much higher. And in cases of going to Thailand, for example, it could be 10 times more than this. But just to put this into perspective, a worker in Myanmar in the factory, their average wage is about 1.4 US dollars. So for someone who only earns about 1.4 US dollars, if they want to leave the country to migrate to a job to another country, that financial cost is actually a big burden, which means that first of all, they probably have to use the little money they've already saved up. If they have some land back in their hometown, or their family would probably have to sell their land. And even if that's still not enough, then they probably have to lend money with high interest rates. That being said, we also have a lot of channels nowadays for fraud and schemes. And just to give an example is that imagine you have workers who, let's say, already saved that little money, also sold the land, taking up high interest rates to prepare to go abroad, with this hope that when they do get abroad, then they will get a job that actually can make enough money to repay all of that and make enough money to send back home. But then a few months later, you're mentally preparing yourself, and then you're told that you're nearly getting your passport and things are underway, but then abruptly, you learn that you've been scammed. So now you don't have the money saved, the land is gone, and you're left with the high interest rates. In other words, you're actually in a worse off position than where you started. And this is actually the situation that many of those aspiring to leave the country are actually facing right now. There are different channels of scamming and fraud channels online as well as on the ground. And of course, when these scammers disappear, it's really difficult to track them down, and more difficult to get your money back or even take them to court. And of course, when we speak with the civil society organizations who work on the ground in the communities to promote safe migration, but also trying to prevent scams happening in the community, they're actually threatened by these informal brokers and scammers. Of course, these are the kind of situations and challenges that some of the workers, aspiring workers who are trying to migrate abroad are facing. But in addition, when they do go abroad, there are also, I think many of the other panelists have also mentioned earlier on, there are also challenges when they go abroad, such as even if you're going with an MOU, you might still be stranded without work over there. And there are also other issues related to unscrupulous brokers in the country of the host country, and working conditions which can be exploitative, discriminatory, and also having experiencing harassments. And of course, even in other countries, there's still high commodity costs, which can actually impact on the workers, especially while they're still trying to look for work in the other country. For illegal migrants, the situation is more dire. It's actually more challenging. In addition to the challenge of migration, there's also unequal working conditions, limited access to health, especially for mental health. And of course, for those migrating illegally, there's always this constant threat of deportation.
Thank you, Titi. And I mean, that was really comprehensive. And so just to sort of clarify a few points, workers from Myanmar are extremely motivated to leave the country.
Yes.
There's an economic imperative. However, there's also, because of conscription, a physical imperative as well, that people are migrating because they don't want to have to join the Myanmar army and fight. I think that the other thing that's interesting, and it's important not to lose this, is the idea that Myanmar workers might pay tax outside of Myanmar, and this has implications for companies who are employing those workers, because that tax will be paid to the current regime in Myanmar, and so there's a danger that companies could be deemed being in some way complicit with what is going on if they fulfill that requirement. We should also remember that, of course, and this is true for many migrant workers, that families and loved ones are very often left at home. And so whatever you might do abroad, it might impact on family. And these are other compelling reasons that workers may act in a certain way. And all of these things may mean that workers end up working illegally or undocumented, as we say, in other countries all the way around the world. And Myanmar workers, we're seeing Myanmar workers turn up in all sectors and all locations. Very often these were quite trained, highly trained workers, a lot of hospitality sector workers and others who are now having to try and find work all the way around the world. But it seems, Titi, that these migrant workers, they're really caught between a rock and a hard place, right, because there's requirements from their own government that impose a range of challenges. But if they fulfill those, or they don't fulfill those, they end up operating in an undocumented way. And what's particularly disheartening, and the one thing that maybe we haven't mentioned, is around walk-in recruitments, that very often others are taking advantage of that situation and using it to exploit these workers even more, with hiring managers, particularly in Thailand, charging migrant workers fees for walk-in recruitments and so on. And we're seeing a whole range of other exploitations that, just when people are really down and out, other people, rather than helping, are just serving to visit further exploitation on them because they're vulnerable. Titi, thank you very much for that. That was great. I'm going to turn now to Bonnie, who, as well as being our question Meister, is also leads her own organisation, Work Better Innovations, but also is a Taiwanese expert. And Bonnie, companies in Taiwan feature in the supply chains have many well-known international brands. Taiwan is also part of the sort of critical production network for computer chips in particular. And earlier this year, myself and our colleague Guna joined you in Taiwan for the first Business and Human Rights Forum, which was illuminating for me. But I understand you're now going to tell us a little bit more about Taiwan and what you see are the challenges for companies choosing to source goods from there.
Thank you very much for the invitation. The challenge for me is to talk about Taiwan in only 10 minutes. But I want to start off by thanking. We see an increase in the online participations of callers from Taiwan. You're not here, but I know you're here. So thank you for calling in this late. We know what we have to do for Taiwan. We're not making reforms at the speed that we want and we need for the protection of migrant rights in Taiwan. So let's keep talking past this presentation. So the case of migration to Taiwan, I want to quickly give you an overview. Many of you here would have known a bit about remediation of recruitment fees in Taiwan, so this would not be a surprise. But I want to quickly say that this is the latest figure available from the Ministry of Labor. We have about 758,000 registered migrant workers in Taiwan at the moment. It's very regulated, meaning that there are broadly only two sectors of work where companies can hire, or employers can hire migrant workers. And they're roughly called productive industries and social welfare. So we see roughly the figure here. Now, social welfare is mostly, domestic care, those involved in the care of the elderly and the disabled. So we see that that's roughly at 250,000. So when we're looking at supply chain issues in Taiwan, we're mostly focused on roughly the 500,000 migrant workers. And they're placed across the range of work, So Neil mentioned electronics and chips, definitely. Many of you probably would have heard of fisheries and construction, advanced textiles, and specialized sporting goods and so forth. There are 4 countries of origin, so 4 former migration corridors to Taiwan. So they are Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and Thailand. So if we're looking at these numbers and we dig just a layer above, they're fairly differentiated by sector of work. So if we're looking at number, well, the top 2 countries are Indonesia and Vietnam. That the most migrant workers in Taiwan are from Indonesia and Vietnam. But if we correlate that with sector of their work, we see a different picture. So if we're looking at supply chain, we're mostly looking at workers from Vietnam, and we're looking at workers from the Philippines, where you see about 90% and 82% of them, respectively, are placed in industry. Now, if you're looking at domestic care, most of the workers would be hired from Indonesia, and they are, as we know, mostly women. The government recently announced there will be a 5th migration corridor that's to come, potentially next year, 2025, with India. And I will talk a little bit about this in the slide on complexities. All right, complexities. So I want to debunk the first one. And I hear this a lot in Taiwan, which is that the migration picture is too complicated. It's too complicated. Well, we just heard from Titi. And I always say, comparatively, Taiwan has a straightforward migration picture. 4 migration corridors. We have about 80,000 undocumented migrant workers who have absconded. That's probably at the lower end of estimates. We have about 20,000 children who are not registered, stateless. So this is broadly the picture we're looking at. And when we're looking at neighbors of Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, their migration corridors feature in double digits, right? So I think this is a myth that we need to debunk, which is that Taiwan has a complicated migration picture, because it does not correlate with evidence. But it is an opportunity because of the fact that it is more straightforward, that we can fix more things. There are more known variables. So there are other real complexities. Some of them I will just talk a little bit about, and some of them might be surprising. So I have here on the screen the Dhaka principles, and they are in the traditional Chinese script. So one of the complexities that come up, and it's one of these, devils in the detail type of things that can impede your discussion with suppliers. Just what language are you going to the supplier with? Is it in the script they understand? So traditional Chinese script is different from simplified Chinese script. Most of the documents that we find now in Chinese are in the simplified script, which is the script that is used in China, but it's not the script that's used in Taiwan. So there's almost like a, complexity that is, imagine going to a supplier and said, these are your code of conduct, and we took the initiative of translating into Chinese, and it's not the right script. It could be a little bit off-putting. Now, I'm curious, because I know it has happened to me where they show me a Chinese document and it's not in traditional script. We also know that the buyer-supplier relationship is not symmetrical, right? So how many suppliers actually turn around to their buyers and said, I'm sorry, but this is not the script we use, right? And I think this is important. This is a complexity that needs to be teased out, that there are local variations that can either facilitate or impede this genuine dialogue that you can have with your suppliers and workers. Now, I mentioned quickly about this corridor that's to come with India. Taiwan, very soon, next year, will be a super aged society, a distinction that it shares with Japan, meaning that 1 in 5 out of 1 in 5 people in Taiwan is over the age of 65. Now, Taiwan is reaching that distinction at a much faster rate than what Japan, how many years Japan took to reach that. So the issue of this population decline is on everyone's mind, and it's been listed as a national security issue. So this migration of potential workers from India is seen as a way to kind of, meet the demand of the domestic economy. But it faced backlash, and also the key question to ask is, we know about the problems that exist in migration corridors all over the world, not just in Taiwan. Is it a simple copy and paste, or are we going to aim to do it better? Now, there are some other local particularities that I would like to just quickly go over. So this is in the law, in the regulations of Taiwan. And those of you who have worked on remediations in Taiwan would know this. To my knowledge, Taiwan's the only place that has this, where migrants pay this. They pay this out of their monthly pay slip, and it's called the monthly service fees. It's staggered, meaning that the fees are differentiated based on their year of service in Taiwan. So it's about $50 that's taken from their wage every month. And most remediations are focused on the repayment of these fees because the other fees are prohibited in Taiwanese law. So you have to do additional layers of digging, right, to find the evidentiary trail. Okay. In comparison, what do employers pay? $2,000, and it's calculated on an annual basis. So this does not make sense. Why do we put monthly service charges on migrant workers and we only charge $2,000 annually for employers? What does this fee cover, and what are they paying for? Now, I put a picture of a migrant care worker in the parks of Taiwan. It's a very common theme because Taiwan is also as I said, rapidly aging society. So this is not a very unique thing. You see that all over. Migrant domestic workers hasn't featured so much in our discussion so far because we're looking at supply chains. It did feature very importantly in the panel yesterday on women migrant workers. But this, for me, is the linchpin. It's the heart of the knot that we cannot yet entangle. Now, let me just quickly tell you why is this an interesting and very difficult local challenge is because when we look at moving to the employer pays principle, move to the employer pays principle, we're also asking employers of migrant domestic workers to pay this charge. Now imagine if you're doing an election that you know it's tight. Which politician would come up and say, when things are tight, that I advocate for changing to the employer pays principle when I, as an employer of a migrant domestic worker in the family, taking care of the parents, have to pick up this cost. But if we can address this, I believe we can untangle the puzzle because that's where I see in my conversations with Taiwanese suppliers, employers, civil society, government, they all come down to this question, so who pays? Are you asking for all the employers to pay? And all the employers of migrant domestic workers would say, we need someone to help us take care of the elderly. So there are various issues, right? We're also looking at the invisibility of women's work in the household. Why is that not recognized to the same degree? So I'll just quickly park it there as a local oddity that we can all think about in the Q&A. And I will just mention a few things at a crossroad for Taiwan. Thank you very much for, the opportunity here for us to talk about Taiwan. The crossroad being of many things, but I'll just put two things out there. One, Taiwan's investments in Southeast Asia surpassed that of China for the first time. I think fairly recently. Couple that with Taiwanese export to the US exceeded Taiwanese export to mainland China by 2 million, I think it's dollars, this year for the first time. So we see this active movement of investments away from mainland China to other localities in Southeast Asia and other markets, one of them being the EU. So the fact that we're talking about the CSDDD, it's keenly felt in Taiwan as an opportunity for investment, but also for the future of how Taiwan sits with the world. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Just to add a further complexity to an already complex situation, but from a point of view of a civil society organisation like ourselves, we should remember that it's not possible for the UN organisations, the ILO and the IOM and others, who would normally be present in these situations, to operate within Taiwan because of the unique status of the China-Taiwan geopolitical relationship in the region. So any work that is undertaken there doesn't benefit from the input of any of the UN organisations, which adds yet a further sort of complexity there. Just very quickly, because I always love to see the Dakar Principles written in different languages. It's also available in both traditional and simplified Chinese and a range of 30 other languages on the Dakar Principles website. So wherever you're going, you can probably find a Dakar Principles that fits. But Bonnie, we were really hopeful for a while that change might be on its way. When you and I were in Taiwan earlier this year, we spoke to somebody from the authorities there who was writing a new national action plan. We just had a successful, I think it was the 4th election, and it seemed that had gone smoothly. And yet, more recently, it seems that it wasn't quite as smooth as we hoped.
In short, yes, it's not what we had hoped. Perhaps it was not completely unexpected. I don't know. But I don't think we can ever give up the hope of changing the legislative framework, right? We keep on talking about state-based and voluntary-based industry-level initiatives. We can't stop using all the tools that we have at our disposal. So one avenue is a bit difficult now due to disagreements in the legislature. It's basically no party has a majority. It's difficult now. But on the other hand, we're hopeful that there are many brands in the room, many brands who supported the first business forum on human rights and environmental due diligence in Taiwan that took place in April that Neil talked about. And we have to find ways of creating momentum through other channels. We may not be able to have the direct technical assistance that you spoke about, Neil, but I think we all have to be creative, ways of translating this knowledge, and also to recognize that Taiwan faces unique challenges. There are no other place like it, but it's backed by a huge civil society presence, a lot of very committed people who are also with me on the line today. We're pushing for change through things that are perhaps not as well known, but we're hopeful and we'll keep pushing.
Thank you. We'll wish with you. Okay, I'm going to turn now to Tamara. Thank you for waiting, Tamara. So, the Gulf. According to the last World Bank survey, the 6 Gulf countries between them host over 30 million migrant workers, and the region is a key actor in shaping flows of migrant workers, particularly from South Asia. We also know that this has thrown up many challenges for business and governments concerning the way those workers are recruited and employed, and we've discussed these things many times at global forums and within the work that many of the organisations in this room have done and that IHRB have done. But we've got a new IHRB programme, Gulf Sustain, and it's going to be looking at these challenges, but locating that discussion within the framework of maybe a new reality, an ambition for the region. So you're going to tell us a bit more about the project. Thanks, Tamar.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to tell you, So Gulf Sustain is IHRB's regional initiative. For now, my presentation will be focused on Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE because that's where we have presence currently, although we plan to continue expanding into the other 3 GCC countries within the next year or 2. So, I mean, when we're talking about complexities in these regions, there's obviously a sort of temptation to focus on the challenges associated with it. But really, I'd like to focus a little bit more on the kind of opportunities. Gulf Sustain is framed very much with the hope of sort of advancing responsible business practices and promoting worker welfare in the context of what's happening in the Gulf. So to frame what's actually happening, to take a step back, each of the 6 Gulf Cooperation Council countries today is in the process of executing an economic diversification plan. So basically working to sort of reduce reliance on oil and gas and really kind of future-proof their countries. So part of this is really in recognition of the fact that they do have to shift towards a kind of greener future, a greener economy. There are a lot of common points between these very kind of ambitious plans. So common sort of denominators include betting on tourism, investing heavily in tech innovation, and critically, one of the main pillars is really pushing the kind of citizens, the national workforces, into private sector employment. Within these societies, citizens tend to be very focused on working in the public sector, whereas private sector is dominated. The majority of private sector workers are foreign nationals. So these are some of the kind of common sort of elements. But really, I think it's also very important to focus on the diversity. Whereas we tend to look at the GCC like it's a sort of homogenous block, there's a lot of difference in terms of how they wish to be seen by the world, the role they want to play on the sort of global world, on the world stage, their priority areas and what they're really focusing on, and very importantly, the motivations for this socioeconomic change is very different. So for example, if you look at the UAE, there's a little bit less of a sense of urgency in executing these plans because, for better or worse, there's this perception globally that the UAE is a safe place to do business. There's less of a need for them to sort of reform, to do labor reforms, to improve their human rights track record, even though their situation is no better than, for example, Saudi Arabia. But one of the key differences for Saudi Arabia, for example, is that their change is very much motivated by the internal pressures of their society. So demographics really plays an important role. It's the biggest economy and country of the Gulf Cooperation Council group, and more than 60% of their population is under 30 years old. And there's a huge desire from this very young population to be future-proofed and to see a lot of change. So it's important when you're looking at this region to also focus on the kind of nuances, to be able to identify what unique opportunities lie in each of these countries. Another area, I don't know if you can see all that text, it might be too small, but another area where if you really deep dive into the kind of labor markets and the regulations of the GCC countries, you begin to understand that they're all kind of at different stages of implementing change or progress. So on the middle column is Qatar. And this is probably the country that is most reliant on foreign labor. I mean, the Qatari population, the nationals, only make up about 250,000 people. So more than 99% of their workforce, of the private sector workforce, is made up of foreign nationals. And that's not likely to change, at least not in the sort of short to mid-term. But we did see a big wave of labor reform in the build-up to the Qatar World Cup. And we're hoping to see some of that sort of change reflected in Saudi Arabia in the coming years as they kind of gear up for their own World Cup. the international sort of pressure and visibility into Qatar's labor system forced them to sort of accelerate these changes. Although there's obviously ongoing questions of how well these changes have been enforced and if they're actually just on paper. For example, one of the big ones was the abolition of the kafala or sponsorship system. But whether or not that still happens sort of culturally is more difficult to know. But in the case of Saudi Arabia, for example, they have less of a dependence. I mean, it's still the majority of the workforce is made up of migrant workers, but they have less of a dependence on them because they have more, I mean, obviously a bigger population and much more sort of socioeconomic diversity in their own national population. So, for example, over the last more than a decade, the Saudi government has been pushing to have more and more Saudi nationals work as taxi drivers, which has a real impact on foreign workers who traditionally have filled these roles. So their Vision 2030, their economic diversification plans, you could argue, has more of an impact on migrant workers kind of in the short to mid-term, between now and 2030, which is when their vision is supposed to have been executed. So Gulf Sustain sort of comes in to fill this gap a little bit. We've identified kind of 3 sort of pillars to our approach which serve to sort of fill this gap. The first is addressing the lack of data or transparency into a lot of the labor plans and the labor needs in the future through sort of building research and contributing to the basis of knowledge, basically. Second is looking into capacity building. So we're developing training modules and hosting and co-hosting strategic dialogues, both online and in person in the region, to really bring together different stakeholders and raise awareness and give them sort of a safe space to have these conversations across different stakeholder groups. And then the third is working very closely with the private sector to co-create solutions wherever possible. From our engagement with the private sector in the region, it's become very clear that one of their major needs is for knowledge to be contextualized. So whereas they understand there's things like the UN Guiding Principles, the Dhaka Principles, there are all these frameworks and tools available to them, but they don't know how to reconcile that with their own needs within their national and regional contexts and how to keep up with such a fast-changing environment. I mean, in the Gulf, you can see policies change from one day to the next, and it's very difficult to sort of keep up with translating those policies into kind of meaningful action. I think I will stop there just for the sake of time.
Thank you very much, Tamara. So what you're sort of saying is that the new development and economic diversification that's underway in the GCC countries could offer an opportunity for change in some of the challenges that we have seen, but we're yet to find out which way these things go.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, it's a matter of seeing which way it will fall, because obviously there's inherent risks. There is the risk that already vulnerable workers will continue to be exploited or be subject to poor working conditions within this transition. But what we argue at Gulf Sustain is that this is really an opportunity to advance both the people and planet agenda sort of simultaneously. With the way that the economic diversification plans are set out, is that they give you a blueprint for exactly what industries the governments will be betting on. And that gives us an opportunity to sort of anticipate some of the labor shortages and push for things like reskilling and upskilling of migrant workers to ensure that they're protected, at least within this transition.
Thank you. And more details about Gulf Sustain. Well, actually, if you put Gulf Sustain into a search engine, you'll end up on the dedicated portal for that, or please grab Tamara over coffee later. Carmen, do we have questions then, please? So Carmen's had a promotion. She's moved up from question technician. She is now our question master. Let's see if she's up to the job.
Believe it or not, it's a good place to work in IHRB. I recommend. Easy promotions. So we have received a couple of questions. Very interesting. I'm gonna shoot the 3 ones that I have recollected, and brace yourself for the third one, I must claim, because of how long it is. So the first one is, it could be for the 3 of you or either of you, what about AI? What could the role of AI be to help counter some of the challenges faced around responsible recruitment in your regions? That's the first one. The second one is, can you give punctual recommendations on the use of complaint management systems that address challenges faced by migrant workers in destination countries? So first one is AI, second one is about compliance management systems, and third one is, in practice, how has the Abu Dhabi dialogue and the Colombo process improved the recruitment process for migrant workers, including advancing efforts to eliminate worker-borne fees? What role does ASEAN have in improving recruitment and eliminating fees? And are Taiwanese recruitment issues included in these dialogue processes and regional groups? That was the third one.
Thank you, Carmen. I think that maybe we start with AI, which hasn't come up before. But do the panelists have any views on how AI might impact on some of the things that we've been discussing?
Yeah, I can take that.
Yep.
I would like to take that because Taiwan is at where it is now owing to its dominance in the semiconductor industry, right? We all have phones. You're holding literally a part that has passed through Taiwan, right? So it's seeing AI as the next industry where you can establish similar dominance. And that dominance is not just economic dominance. That dominance also comes in the form of why people care to talk about Taiwan, why Taiwan features in international discussions, even though it is not part of the UN system. So it has many different layers. NVIDIA, a company with the Taiwan founder, just became the world's largest company, valued company, more than Apple. So this is a trajectory that's happening globally with ripples that's very keenly felt in Taiwan. Now, let me counter that with an example of how AI potentially is it's a risk that we need to think about how to mitigate. So I highlighted the corridor potentially, what that's to come with India potentially for next year. Now, when it first came out, it faced significant backlash. There were reports of racism against those of South Asian origin, highly debated. And then there was some information that this is a misinformation campaign. Some parts of it was a misinformation campaign, because that is something that Taiwan's always on the guard against. It's difficult to wade through. Things that we're working through with AI, risk posed by AI to democracy, these are existential questions that Taiwan needs to face. I don't have all the solutions, I don't know, because it's advancing more rapidly than what my mind can analyze. But I hope that as we are looking at things like risks, we can also look at things where technology could lower the cost of supply chain due diligence for SMEs. Because another local thing that is quite odd is that Taiwan's economy is mostly SMEs, at a much higher percentage for South Korea, much higher percentage for Japan, close to 99%. So all the challenges we know about, that is the thing to sell to SMEs. How do we get them to care and feel like they're part of this discussion? That is the wider road.
Thank you, Bonnie. And complaint management systems. I wonder, Titi, would that interest you?
Oh, actually, I don't need this anymore.
Do you want me to find it? Which one is it? I'll find it. This one?
Yeah, so actually, just realized that I have some recommendations put up that I didn't get a chance to speak earlier on, but these are actually some of the recommendations for the host countries. And just one message before I go to the complaint mechanism is that usually because of the challenges in the country, Myanmar, and also the countries that the migrant workers face outside the country, as well as the changing on the more information, instructions that are coming out. when we speak to when we speak to companies who are actually having migrant workers in the supply chain, Myanmar migrant workers in the supply chain outside the country, there's a reluctance of hiring more Myanmar migrant workers because they seem that actually maybe that's a bit, there's more trouble and more work to be done, and maybe it's actually better just to hire nationalities from other countries instead of Myanmar. So for us, the message that we want to give is do continue to hire Myanmar migrant workers in your supply chain outside of the country. And of course, that's not only supporting the migrant workers, but also supporting their families who are in Myanmar as well. So just one message that I wanted to pass on. Complaint mechanisms, can you repeat the question again?
So how do complaint management systems operate? How could they help the situation? Would it even be relevant for Myanmar migrant workers, or are these systems in place?
So there are actually some complaint management systems. For example, ISRA have some good relation management systems, which actually allows to hear workers' voice through different channels. It's not what we are doing, but there are already some complaint mechanism systems that allow workers to receive workers' voices and to work from then onwards. And of course, it's also about getting the data from the different sources, but also making sure that these grievances are followed up to make sure that actually they're effective. So,
Thank you. Just for anyone who doesn't know, ISRA are an NGO very active in the Myanmar Thai corridor and elsewhere, and they promote an app called the Golden Dreams app, which has lots of information for workers. There was one other question about ASEAN. You know, how has ASEAN been involved, or is ASEAN at all engaged or involved in the situation of Myanmar and Myanmar workers now travelling to other ASEAN member countries?
Oh gosh. Yeah. Oh.
Is that one a bit?
Yeah. So I think that's another reason for why a lot of these solutions that we talked about, CSDDD and legislations, the hard law approach, we have to think real hard about, do they copy and paste in Asia? Because the context is different. We don't have a very strong regional human rights system, right? We don't have we don't have the court, we don't have the regional treaty. And so on the ASEAN front, it took ASEAN member states so long, 2 decades almost, to get to the stage where we're now, where we have an ASEAN consensus on migrant workers. Consensus, so it's not treaty law. And it excludes undocumented workers from the outset, unless there was a compromise language used, but effectively that's what it did. In my mind, it has never seriously engaged with the issue of recruitment fees and zero fees. So I think that is something that we need to really work on, like the normative context on which we're standing on in terms of Asia is very different. And for those of us who are working on this bridge, we're constantly doing the translation, not only in language, jumping from script, but also in normative assumptions, but also explaining that this is not imposition, because it also matters to us how we want to leave behind the world for our kids, So I think we need to use all the tools that we have, recognizing that one solution found regionally may not be the best to export it. There's some local adaptation that is involved, and it needs to come from a place of perhaps honesty and humility that we don't have all the solutions yet. You can talk about ASEAN. No?
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
That's fine.
No, that's fine. And then Tamara, we had a question, about the Abu Dhabi dialogue. Again, and I had to very quickly look it up myself, just to make sure that I got it right. But so Abu Dhabi dialogue is the countries of destination in the Gulf region, working with countries of origin, mostly from sort of South Asia. But it would be stretching the truth a little bit to say that the Abu Dhabi dialogue has been a fantastic success, but where do you see it sitting now within the new paradigm that's you're sort of envisaging for the Gulf region? Has it run its course, or can it be sort of reinvigorated, do you think?
I mean, my hope is that we will see it move from being a place where you sort of pay lip service to these things to being a place where actual solutions can kind of come about. But I think similarly to what Bonnie was saying, to me, one of the kind of key hindrances of progress in things like the Abu Dhabi dialogue is a lack of coherence and collaboration regionally. So like you're saying about ASEAN, like with the Gulf Cooperation Council itself as a forum, it's painstakingly slow, and discussions tend to kind of fall apart in part because of different priorities, rivalries, a lot of intra-regional competition. And I think fixing that first will be a precondition of actual practical solutions coming out of things like the Abu Dhabi dialogue, which has huge potential. Obviously, it's a much needed kind of forum, but whether or not it's being used properly or to the best of its kind of ability is to be seen.
Okay, well, I think that actually leads us on to something that maybe we can consider just at the end of this discussion, because it seems to me that very often much of this debate is centered around attitudes towards migrant workers, low-wage migrant workers from particular countries, and the discrimination against them that frequently sort of accompanies that. And I think that many of the things that all three of you have sort of been discussing are rooted in these views of migrant workers, that they should be grateful that they're coming, that they're there's waves of them, that we see all these tropes and debates all the way around the world, and we see it within Asia as well as when migrants come to North America, when migrants come to Europe as well. And Bonnie, for instance, we saw this big time in Taiwan during the COVID pandemic. Perhaps you could just sort of reiterate that story and the ways that this manifested itself there.
Yes. Thank you. So in Taiwan during the pandemic, Taiwan, for the first year of lockdowns abroad, Taiwan actually had a fairly normal existence. And then the lockdown came a bit later for Taiwan, a year later. And what happened was migrant workers at a factory, there was a cluster that emerged. And then so employers took the decision to put freedom of movement restrictions on the migrant workers. So it was basically to and from the dormitory to the workplace. And the reason was we needed to keep production going. Now, what they did had no basis in public health, right? It was not ordered by disease control, nor was it imposed for the general population. So we actually did a few programs then to try to, import lessons from Singapore on what not to do. And how can we manage the spread of disease in a way that's compliant with international human rights standards and make more public health sense. But we needed to do that because owing to the reasons that you said, we needed to be creative about these technical channels of these comparative, sharing lessons. And yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
And TT, this is what Myanmar workers experience everywhere. Constantly. Yep. It's low-waged, but a very low view of these workers, that they're viewed as others all the time. And that is why people feel that they can take advantage of them in these situations. Yeah.
Yes, and that, currently in the current situation, it's also more difficult to remedy, and also for these workers to actually have access to information, also have access to the grievance mechanisms, and even they might not have the information that they need or know their rights as well. So yes.
Yeah, and it's take it or leave it. You're lucky to get anything. Yeah. And Tamara, changing attitudes in the Gulf. What would you think? What would you hope?
I mean, I would hope attitude would start to change. I'm not sure I've seen much of that yet. But in the case of the Gulf, I think it's more, a lot of it is that there is a sense of kind of hierarchy amongst migrant workers. You know, one nationality is deemed to be sort of better than another, and there's obviously preference, there's usually preference for Muslim migrant workers, especially in domestic work. But I would hope to see some of this, obviously, change.
Great stuff. That brings us to the end. I think that was, you can see how just 3 different places, countries of origin and destination, can provide really complex situations that companies need to understand and then negotiate and make sure that when they're undertaking their due diligence, they've got this in full view so that they really have a good understanding of what's going on. So can we please thank the panel, please? Great. And the next panel is all about hospitality.
Is off now. Yes? Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. So for this panel, this one is a little bit of a shorter session, and we really want to use this opportunity to deep dive into the hospitality sector in particular, to give us kind of an opportunity to unpack some of the more specific challenges and opportunities. So we have 2 lovely panelists here with us today that are going to tell us a little bit more about their own experiences within this sector. And hopefully we can turn some of the more kind of abstract theoretical things we've been talking about in some of the other panels to more practical advice. So maybe if I'll give you just a couple of minutes to introduce yourselves first.
Okay. I'm Michelle Mason. I work for the World Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. And just to give you a brief intro as to what the Alliance does, we are a convening organisation. We bring together CEOs and C-suites and member partners to achieve sustainability practice. Our affiliate members consist of real estate owners, investment funds, technology companies, procurement specialists, legal and consulting firms. Currently at the moment we have over 300 donor members. That is 7 million rooms globally and over 50 strategic partners. Those numbers will really, as we carry on talking, you'll get a real understanding, because currently the hospitality industry is at a development growth not seen before, from my understanding. I'll hand you.
Thank you. So I'm Sama Abbasi. Is my mic on? It is now, okay. I lead the human rights team at Intercontinental Hotel Group. I'll keep it very brief. I'm sure many of you are familiar with our brands, but we are one of the world's leading hotel companies. We have 19 brands with over 6,000 hotels in approximately 100 countries.
Great, thank you so much. For this session, I think we specifically chose the hospitality industry because in the hotel sector especially, there's a certain level of distance, or there can be a certain level of distance between the employer and the employees through the use of agencies or through a franchise model, and a lot of potential for a kind of more hidden workforce. I really wanted to start by getting your perspective on this and how you think hotel companies are ensuring that workers are, first of all, recruited safely and that their rights continue to be respected throughout the process. And also if you can reflect on whether this is accounted for differently across different kind of contexts, in different countries or regions or cultures, or however you may see it.
Okay, I'll go first. So within the industry, they take a range of initiatives. So Many companies adhere to, obviously, the international standards. We talk about policies, for instance, the United Nations Guiding Principles on Human Rights, the International Labour Organization, convention, the Global Code of Ethics for Tourism and tourism organizations. Hotel chains develop and enforce supplier codes of conduct that require suppliers to follow ethical practices, and also look at fair wages, working hours for employees, also safe working conditions and non-discrimination. Some hotel or companies have their own ethical recruitment policies, and these include the standard of no fees, transparent contracts, fair recruitment processes. And also with this, the industry, their training both managers and staff is critical and crucial so that employees know about their rights, ethical recruitment practices, and also ways to report abuse. And many of the companies have third-party audits, certification, and ensure compliance with the labour standards. And the training part is really key for managers as well as staff.
Thank you.
So I'll briefly tell you how we're doing it at IHG. We first started looking at this issue in a, I guess, much more intentional, meaningful way in about sort of 2018, 2019. This was identified as a salient issue for us in a sort of global risk assessment. At that point, we just didn't really understand the nature of the risk, so partnered with an external consultancy to do some in-country assessments. So in some countries like Oman, we went in and visited hotels, did worker interviews, engaged with stakeholders and hotel management, did that in a couple of other countries, partnered with organizations like the IOM to feed into projects that were looking at migration corridors. I think one was Filipino workers coming into the Gulf, which our hotels participated in. And there was a huge amount of work in the run-up to the Qatar World Cup, a lot of auditing and a lot of capability building. I mean, all of that, we identified sort of risks through all of those different assessments, and they all led to the development of a set of standards that we call the responsible labour requirements, but essentially minimum standards for our hotels that we manage across a number of topics. So recruitment, I'm going to get this wrong now, but recruitment and employment, worker voice, accommodation, and working with third-party labour providers and recruitment agencies. So a sort of a range of issues. And they focus on recruitment risks, but also risks throughout employment also. So I think what we've done over the last couple of years is really focused on trying to make sure that we've got the right standards in place. We've had a long-standing commitment to human rights for, I don't know since when, for years. I think what we realised was that high-level commitment to no forced labour or no worker should pay a fee was quite abstract for hotels. And so we recognised the need to develop operational sort of guidance to turn that high-level commitment into a series of sort of instructions, essentially, for hotels to follow to make sure that the risks were identified and addressed. So we're in about year 2 of implementation. It's going well. There are challenges. The maturity of implementation varies across regions. We do have some regional variation in the standards, but we've really tried hard to keep a baseline that's consistent. And where we're trying to focus on now is how do we measure the success of the implementation of those standards. We're relying on self-assessments at the moment, but we all know the shortcomings of self-assessment. So we're hoping to do some in-country validation this year, so visiting some of our higher risk markets and engaging with workers to understand their experiences. But that's not scalable or sustainable for us. We can't visit 6,000 hotels every single year forever. So we need to also consider what are the other ways that we can, assess implementation that sits sort of in between self-assessment and on-site validation. And the other thing we're really trying to better understand is just more about the risk. Like, how does that risk actually What does it look like in different regions? What is our exposure to the risk? We're a very decentralized business, so just getting basic data on how many migrant workers our hotels actually employ, where they're coming from, whether they stay in staff accommodation provided by the hotel or a third party, like all of that basic data is sitting in 6,000 different places. Right. So we're really trying to build our capability and our capacity at the central level to have more oversight and more centrally collected data.
Thank you, that's really interesting. One of our cross-cutting themes, as most of you know, for this forum has been looking specifically at the case of women migrant workers. They're obviously more vulnerable by virtue of having the kind of triple low-wage migrant and being women. So I wonder how you account for that risk specifically, if at all.
So what a lot of the industry are doing are taking gender-specific provisions within their policies and their supplier code of conduct. So looking at the provision of discrimination based on gender, outlining measurements to protect female workers from exploitation and abuse. These can include female workers, for example, ensuring that they receive the same salary as their male counterparts for performing the same tasks, risk assessing, looking at their policies through a gendered lens, also looking at how promotion and hiring happens, ensuring that there are women in leadership positions, and also looking at, when you look at your policies and your procedures and your promotions, who's not in the room and how can we get them in the room, and what support can be done to bring women along this journey as well. Also, guidelines about preventing and addressing sexual harassment and other forms of gender violence. So there are systems in place and developing trust within your female cohort to, what do you do when you want to report sexual harassment at work? Are those mechanisms working correctly? Have they been checked? And do they understand that they can report it? Those are some of the procedures that they're taking. And the key thing, again, is training, is instilling in the workforce that, to get an understanding of what this looks like and how it can be addressed, and looking at the education of employees and management within these systems is so key, because often these women workers, as the hospitality industry is expanding, we're going to be more reliant on migrant workers, more reliant on women coming into the industry who are vulnerable, and often these vulnerabilities and these abuses happen prior to them getting into the workforce. So you're looking at working with civil society, local community groups, as well as promoting so that women are more educated when coming into these positions.
Thank you.
My answer is going to be very short. We haven't done a huge amount of work on this. I think in a sort of broader workforce perspective, there's a huge amount of work going on to look at sex discrimination and some of the things that Michelle's been talking about. But in terms of our work to address migrant worker risk, I think our initial focus was to just establish like a floor, like minimum standards that would apply to, in the context of recruitment and employment of all migrant workers, and we've been so focused on just making sure that they are well understood, that we've got training on that we've got resources for our hotels, like we've got remediation guidance, interview templates, due diligence checklists, like all of the supporting stuff. I'm really hoping that going forward we can start looking at this aspect in a bit more detail, particularly with our on-site visits later this year. I think we're going to try and integrate some of that into the assessment, but no, it hasn't been a focus for us, and partly also because we just don't have I couldn't tell you right now what proportion of our migrant workforce is women. We're starting to collect that data this year. I'm really interested to see what it shows us, but yeah, I think going forward we'll take more of a look at this.
Thank you. I just want to ask one last question before we open up in case there are any other questions coming through. But just in the spirit of, we've been talking quite a bit today about collaboration and the need for more of it across all kind of sectors and disciplines. I wonder for you, from the hospitality sector perspective, what kind of collaboration you feel you need, or what kind of support you need from other stakeholder groups and from each other to kind of continue furthering the responsible recruitment and responsible business agendas.
Sorry, took a breath at the same
It's
time.
okay, we both took a breath at the same time. I mean, collaboration is really key, and at the Alliance we work really strongly. Our focus is on collaboration. It's collaborating with members. We have working groups and committees. We work with IOM around looking at safer migration corridors. We work around specific topics that are industry focused to help the industry have a collaborative voice in how they go forward with the work. I mean, when we talk about recruitment agencies, we all know there are recruitment agencies out there that will not change their practice, and then how does that look like, and what can the industry do with a collaborative voice in working with us and work our partnerships and collaborations with organisations like IOM, and looking at how we work together with local government, and looking at, you know, encouraging rather than cutting off, because with encouraging to change rather than we're not going to work with them anymore, that kind of attitude.
Such a long list of things that we would like to have. We have some amazing partnerships. We partner with the IOM, and they provide us with invaluable guidance on all of this work. We collaborate with our peers. I think we take a very open approach to engaging with civil society stakeholders. We'd like to see them as critical friends, so open to any more wanting to talk to us. What we'd like to see more of, I think, collaboration between our industry and other industries. We're quite insular at the moment. Mm-hmm. We have not been doing this for very long. I'd say the maturity of implementation of the guiding principles is fairly low in our industry compared to other industries. There's been a very long and perhaps in some ways disproportionate focus on single topics like human trafficking for a very long time. We're still trying to sort of get the message out that human rights is about so much more than that. Okay, let me get to the other things. So working with other industries, having more access to data and collaborating in a slightly different way. And what I mean by that is we do a really good job of working, you know, with the SHA and our peers on developing resources and guidance and taking part in pilot projects. But actually, I think one of the earlier speakers today said something that really resonated with me, which is probably going to get it really wrong, but something along the lines of like real collaboration is working in a specific place on a specific issue to address something. And I think we haven't quite got there yet with our industry. I'd love to be, you know, when we have issues arise, I'd love to be working with our peers, for example, and taking collective action to build the capabilities of high-risk suppliers. Or if we have, you know, cases where remediation is required, collectively working on that. So moving away from just developing resources and guidance to actually sort of collaborating on action. And the data piece is really, I've heard a couple of times over the last couple of days, things like if there isn't evidence of workers paying recruitment fees, just find out what the average is for that migration corridor. And I'm like, where is this information? What do you mean, just find out? Like, we are a very small team, and in our industry, we're very lucky. A lot of our peers have, you know, one person or half person doing human rights work. So actually, we've invested in a human rights team, which we're very grateful for. But we don't have the time to go and do a huge amount of research on trying to identify what the average recruitment fees and costs are from Myanmar to Thailand, for example. We don't know where to get that information readily, apart from IOM, who we have on speed dial, it seems. Certainly at the hotel level, you know, some hotels have a big HR department, some don't. Some have like one person doing a bit of procurement, a bit of HR, and a bit of management. like how on earth are they supposed to understand the risks related to the the corridor that most of their migrant workers are coming from? So I don't know where all of this information is. I know some of the consultancies and specialists in the room have it. I'd love to see more open source data on this that is easily accessible to companies, because when we are trying to target our due diligence efforts, it's really difficult in the absence of that data. Mm-hmm. Or if it's behind you have to pay for it, or it's behind some kind of, like you have to join a membership organization. Right. Like we just need access to the data so we can start doing this work. So a bit more of that would be nice.
That's really interesting, thank you. I just wanted to see if there are any questions. There are.
Okay, sorry for the mic stuff, but 2 questions. One is a follow-up for you, Tamara, from the last session, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Are there any specific efforts to abolish the kafala system that you can speak about? And then another question's on hotels using agencies for day workers. Are hotels doing due diligence on these day agencies that hire, short-term day workers? Can you speak about that? Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. I guess just on the kafala system, even though that relates to the last panel, I'm not privy to that kind of information at the moment. There are waves of labor reforms supposed to happen in Saudi Arabia, and if they were to model themselves after the Qatari system, then you can expect them to abolish the kafala system. But again, the real question is not whether it's going to be abolished by name, or whether that kind of thing will be properly implemented and accounted for in the long term, because it's one thing to have it kind of crossed off the list of things that are allowed in the country, but it's another thing for them to actually go after the people who continue to uphold this system, especially when it's benefiting the state. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, and I know it was related to the last session, but it's a real issue for us for operating in that area, and we know from a lot of our risk assessments that it has been abolished in a number of countries, but civil society reports indicate that it continues and it persists. So we make it really clear in our internal policies that people should have freedom of movement and be able to transfer employment without restrictions on our part. But it's definitely still a real risk. On the second one, I think I've just learned something new looking at my team member there. But day workers. I will look into it. We work with agencies, of course. So it's a very decentralized business model that we have. We have a large number of franchised hotels, and then we manage some hotels. And there's a whole range of different types of employment setups within those. Sometimes we don't employ foreign workers directly, but in many cases we use agencies or third-party labor suppliers. And in some cases we're learning even more recently that we work on a referral system where current workers are referring friends and family from back home. And I've got to even start to think about what risks that raises beyond our visibility. But I've not come across the use of day workers, so I will look into that.
Michelle, would you like to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't come across the day workers, but there is the temporary workers that come into the industry and the agencies that are used by organisations to get these workers in. And as the industry grows, there's a clear shortage of workers, so there will be an even heavier reliance on agencies as well as migrant workers. So it is key that as an industry we ensure that due diligence checks are done regardless of what way we get the workers coming in.
Exactly, thank you. Are there any more questions, Bonnie?
Yes, there are always questions.
There always will.
But I think there's a question that's general, and I think you addressed it also in your conversation. But I think there's a real thirst for these technical knowledge on what can you do with all the franchise that you manage to scale up the adoption of the employer pays model.
Oh, you just had to leave them. So we're working on it. It's tricky. the industry as a whole has lots of different types of business models, but ours, I can give you ours as an example. So the vast majority of workers across the 6,000 hotels that we have, we do not directly employ. We employ a very small proportion, and the rest are employed by the owner of the hotel. And we essentially receive a fee from those third-party owners to have our brand on their building. And in some cases, we'll manage the hotel for them, which means that we will take care of day-to-day operations. So we have much more control and influence over working conditions, and there's a stricter agreement in place in terms of the application of IHG policies and our code of conduct and our human rights policy and so on. With our franchised hotels, there is a sort of a separation there. We do not employ those workers, and we have some brand standards in place that govern sort of the look and the feel and the smell of the hotel and fire safety and a couple of other important areas, but don't go into employment conditions. And that's really because it creates a huge amount of legal risk for us. There's a clear separation between the owner as an employer and us as the sort of franchisor. It's been that way since the business model has existed. You see this business model in many other industries. We are, I would say, under increasing pressure to do more in this space, and so we are working with colleagues across the business and across the industry to explore what doing more looks like without creating legal risk for the company. So we're thinking about capability building, just understanding our franchised estate a bit better. We have a lot of partners who are pretty sophisticated, will have sort of not only IHG hotels in their portfolio, but Marriott's and Hilton's and Hyatt's. So they're big management companies that are doing a lot in this space also. So just trying to understand where they are and their human rights journey and collaborating a bit more. But it's very early days, and we're just sort of testing out a few things.
And just to pick up on that, as the Alliance, we're looking at ways of working with the industry on how we can support them in engaging these franchisees and these managed properties. So, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I think it's time for our final coffee and tea break of the day. But thank you so much to both of you for joining our panel. That was great.
Okay, yes. All right. Yeah. Cool. Brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. Not doing emails, they're doing right. Thank you. Nice to see you. I can see you.
I have a question about the last session. So it's going to see you later. You want me to check on sleep?
Reckon she did check in with him earlier, so I think we're okay. But maybe just because of the start, I'm not sure what he said. I know he was in the story.
There was a session yesterday on verification. Well, I wasn't there. You were linked to look at the replay. It's not even the payment, like they keep saying that they have already started practice. It's not a repayment thing. I think the repayment was kind of like a 5 years ago or something practice, but for kind of like all the new migrant workers that we've had in the past 2 years, they say that they're not collecting. And have you tried? Have you tried working into it? Just to see. We do. And what do they say? Nothing. Nothing. I mean, like we were not able to find spot. So, and most of the time, yes, like they're from Vietnam, like they're from the Philippines. Exactly. Yeah. Like I think it's pretty obvious, like in the government industry. So, but we're not quite sure whether that's whether we can close the case or like we just don't know because like based on the facts that you share, it doesn't look like which is what the same as what we found. So just want to kind of get some tips.
Yeah. I want to also check with market sectors because these are places that are run by civil society and
Actually, the thing is that we don't have like representatives in Taiwan, and we don't have an office in Taiwan. So how we can kind of engage with the agency, the civil society, like if we don't have someone present.
yeah, that's true. We have ties to civil society. We have good ties. So it's just about we want to know that they are workers sort of whether or not if they're receiving allegations of workers paying issues for the meals that they have.
Right.
This would be the smallest. It could be less. Or you have more data points to come to the decision. You're saying that we have lots of data points.
And it looks perfect. It can be perfect. It's okay. Like we're just not quite 100% sure.
Yeah, nothing to see.
I know.
Yeah.
So you think that we still probably need to do verification?
I think with anything.
I know, like we did. We actually did. Like we actually like also like amateur hours ago here, like to do work at interviews, like of course like all the documentation check is perfect.
decide whether to go in the office or not, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was.
Yeah. She's decided.
So before I talk about AAALP, I want to set a little context about the US.
Sure. So I'm just holding you 3 minutes and
I'll be able to look at the time.
3 minutes and 20 seconds.
Should you have the sign and run it over?
Just drop the question off over there.
Yeah, that's fine. How do I sleep at night? I'm not on the TV. So just keep getting that brain. Maybe it's good. I think I happily roar as well. I think we all take the whatever you're doing. So, no, I just kind of like during the day or just like active movies.
I'm always wondering because I think it's
I think that's it. I think you've got quite a serious case. So you have to move a hand or a leg during the day. I think that's pretty much a definite sign. Oh, there it comes.
all the time, and then I have it internally, and plus externally, and then just so I don't know
Who's speaking next?
Are you the same, exactly same team? And you also would be.
Yeah, thank you.
So maybe the other way around, maybe you have energy.
We've been asking people to take a name tags off, but just in case it. Sure. Maybe if I pack it this end, it's pretty screwed out.
I think it's tough because we have these two supply chains. So you can go from a whole and the next one is about like limit human rights. It's very difficult to look at the brain from. So we're very secure.
If you have a spare pocket, I can go in there. If not, I'll just sit next to you. Speaking as well.
But I am on my job. I don't know if you know Sam.
Yes. Dave.
Say that name loud enough, but I don't know.
I'm just going to grab the collar of your shirt.
She's
Step into
asking
for a
about
second.
Debenhams before that home base.
Thank you very much.
Does so much work in the fish sector. So I think she's
I think it's green. It means the other person hasn't arrived yet. Is it? The one here. Yes, the other variety is not included. There you go. Thank you very much. No, you're on. We've got a meeting until you go live, so just if you can avoid touching the microphone, and if you can avoid, if you happen to look down, you're directly on top of the microphone. Talking directly at it. Apart from that, thank you. Great, thank you.
But I'm learning from a lot of you and all of you because I think this practice is really odd. And I was really interested in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Human rights are way that you engage workers can still be the same despite industries. I know they're significantly different, but effectively what they're after, really saying their journey. Very specific to hiring.
So I would be if California would arrive. We're still waiting for one to come along.
Oh, okay.
we take our seats, please? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last session, the last panel session of the conference. In Glastonbury terms, it's about 11 p.m. Sunday night, but you've made it. All right, so welcome to this final panel session. My name is David Camp. I'm the moderator for this session. I chair Stronger Together. Stronger Together are delighted to be partnering with AIM Progress and the Institute of Human Rights and Business, organisations that we've worked with for many years to further pursue this cause. I'm also chair of the Association of Labour Providers, a trade association celebrating its 20-year anniversary this year, and who from its very inception was formed to drive good practice in the recruitment and supply of workers into the UK food supply chain. Joined on this last session by Pranay Ray. Welcome from Nepal. It was our hope and intention that Pranay would be able to join us in person, but the visa didn't come through. For Pranay, it's sort of late in the evening, and we also welcome Greti Calvo from Ag Socio, for whom it's very early in the morning in California. Both Greti's business and Pranay's business, International Manpower Recruitment, put responsible recruitment at the core of their business. And together with Veronica Espina, Program Manager for Stronger Together in the US and Mexico. In this session, we're going to focus on the reality of the situation on the ground, what works, what has worked, and recommendations for the future about those levers for change that are going to continue this journey towards responsible recruitment in global supply chains. So we are going to focus on, what works, what hasn't necessarily proved to be so successful, and what we need to drive responsible recruitment. We're going to look at levers such as commercial advantages that go to businesses who do the right thing, which I think is that primary lever that we're all looking for, but also looking at developments in legal and human rights due diligence requirements, in international frameworks of labour standards, certification, industry initiatives and associations. So we're going to look at all of those levers, but I'm going to get going by asking each of our panelists, and I'm going to start with you, Pranay. I'm going to ask our panelists to tell us a little bit more about their business and their motivations for putting responsible recruitment at the core of their business and the benefits they've found, but also to ask each of them the biggest challenges that they've found in implementing responsible recruitment, and perhaps
how you overcame that. So, Pranay, I'm going to pass over to you now, and then on to you, Goretti, before moving on to Veronica. And I'm very much hoping that the technology is going to work. So over to you, Pranay, and then we'll see if it does. So, Pranay, take us away.
Good evening from Nepal. So my name is Pranay. I represent International Manpower Recruitment. IMR, International Manpower Recruitment, IMR is an OTL certified recruitment agency based in Nepal, and we are also in the advanced stages of IRE certification process. We transitioned from the traditional recruitment model to 100% ethical recruitment in the year 2018. Since then, we've deployed over 15,000 workers and stood among the top agencies in terms of volume among 853 agencies in Nepal. It took us about 2 years to transition from hybrid model to 100% ethical model. And during this time, we experienced a deep sense of discomfort sending workers on traditional model, as by then we had started doing the ethical job as well. So, however, in between, few of our customers in Malaysia back then recommended us and invited us for various ethical recruitment training sessions. And it was a privilege that we had an employer, who we still do, saw potential in us and had faith in us to grant huge volume of recruitment. That boosted our confidence to transition into full ethical recruitment company, which was a motivation and inspiration. Yes, the biggest challenge in ethical recruitment for now is still to turn down those recruitment orders that do not comply to employer-pays model, which puts our business at a question of sustainability. And whether we've overcome or not is like we've not necessarily come over of it, because as I said, there is this recruitment orders that do not comply employer-pays model. However, we are making conscious effort to diversify our market and sectors, especially in the UK as well, and with an intentional approach to reach out to the large brand-conscious employers directly. That's it.
Thanks, Pranay. Goretti, same questions to you.
Hey, good morning from California. As David said, my name is Goretti Calvo. I'm the Human Resources Director for Ag Socio and also a partner. Ag Socio is an agricultural labor and service provider, and we've been operating in the US, in California, Arizona, and Colorado states for the last 5 years. We not only recruit, but we also employ. So we're also the employer, considered the employer for various clients, which are growers in the agricultural industry. In my various roles in agricultural industry for the past 30 years, I was looking to partner with a company that wanted to focus on building an employment system that focuses on compliance, transparency, best practices, and the ethical treatment of their workforce. Just to name a few things. We began by working closely with the recruitment company and in partnership called Cierto Global. Cierto's recruitment model provides us with a transparent and secure process of recruiting. Right now, we're doing it in Mexico and Guatemala. Part of their model is establishing community partners in various regions that are vetted. And also, they maintain communication with our workers via independent surveys throughout the contract to verify clean recruitment and transparency. We are very involved in that recruitment process. We go to Guatemala, we go to Mexico, we are part of the interview process, we meet the community partners. And it's super important to do that, to be on the ground and actually meeting the workers that we're going to be recruiting. I believe that the benefits of putting responsible recruitment first or among the key core components of our business lets us start the relationship with our workers and our grower clients with trust and respect, foremost. I think one of the biggest challenge that we are consistently fighting against is after we go through our recruitment process, there are people that are trying to take advantage of the trust and respect that we've worked hard to develop, and who turn around and use our name and brand to attempt to charge fees and promise workers seeking an opportunity through them, telling them and promising that they'll get an opportunity. So we work closely with our recruiting partner and on the ground to educate our worker about their rights, and who actually hire respected organizations and people that are on the ground and that have the ability to, and we educate them about who has the authority and ability to make a legitimate job offer. We limit referrals. That's always gets you in trouble when you do referrals and they're not fully vetted. You know, somebody knows somebody and then they refer over people. We consistently and constantly inform and remind workers that, you know, there's no fees to solicit work and no one should be charging them for an opportunity.
Great, thanks, Goretti. And Veronica, turning to you. Now, your role in Stronger Together, and particularly the focus that you have at the moment is to introduce an American Association of Ag Labour Providers, and an association which has responsible recruitment at the core of its business. How do you think that can support farm labour contractors in the US to overcome the challenges of demonstrating that they actually have good practice and are delivering good practice in their business?
So I think to answer that question, it's probably helpful to just add a very quick, simplified context around U.S. agriculture. And we've heard a little bit about that throughout over the past 2 days. But the reality is that the U.S. is facing really serious labor shortages when it comes to agriculture. The domestic workforce is moving out of the sector for a number of reasons. And the labor shortages and cost of labor is going up significantly. And this is causing, in addition to other things, growers and producers to increasingly rely on labor providers, or you might hear me using this term, FLCs, farm labor contractors and recruiters, to be able to bring work into the United States. The workers that come to the US are primarily from Mexico, I would say about 90%. And these workers, it's really important to highlight that they are essential workers and they are skilled workers. We have a visa program called the H-2A visa program, which I think the number was floated around a few days ago or yesterday, and it's over 300,000 visas being issued for the H-2A visa program, which allows workers to come in on a temporary seasonal basis. So that's one situation. And then the other reality in the US is that there are really great variances in labor laws across the states. I could give some examples, but I don't know we'll have time for that right now. But there's no national standardized recruitment guidance. And there really isn't anywhere for these ag labor providers to go for guidance or for resources, for whatever it might be. I mean, there are some licensing requirements in states that have to be met. There's maybe a handful, I can think of 1 or 2 states that require education, but for the rest of the United States, that's a really large gap. And that leads to a lot of the ag labor providers, and there's thousands of varying sizes, demographics, and different geographical locations, to be just kind of untrained and not have the capacity to necessarily run their business in a way that meets the requirements, the state and federal requirements that we do have. So now going back, tying that back to the association that we are calling the American Association of Ag Labor Providers. That's a lot to say, so we call it AAALP for short. And AAALP was born out of this need to provide professionalization and education for our ag labor providers. And that's really the fundamental offering that AAALP will give to the market. It is, for now, it's by Stronger Together. Eventually, we are hoping that it will be run and managed and by the industry, by farm labor contractors. But as this is a new initiative, it's newly incorporated, we're fully in the launch process. We're basing it in Stronger Together's 14 organizational standards on responsible recruitment and fair labor practices. So education on responsible recruitment really being key for this new association. And I also do want to mention that we have an advisory committee of industry players that have been critical in standing up the association, as well as we've taken learnings from ALP as well. Yeah.
Indeed, thank you. Right, coming back to Goretti and Pranay, the last question, you spoke about your businesses and why you had put responsible recruitment at the core of your business. I'm interested in hearing, and all of us here are interested in hearing more about the market that you operate in, and just explain to us where the market that you compete in is now at with regard to the adoption of responsible recruitment. We're seeing increasing human rights due diligence legislation. We're seeing industry initiatives such as SEDEX incorporating responsible recruitment standards. We're seeing the US Ethical Charter Implementation Program. But what I'm interested to hear is, are we actually seeing this trickling down so that it's changing the practices amongst the industry, amongst your competitors, into a commitment to ethical recruitment? So, Goretti, perhaps you could give us your experience first on that issue. Might wait, Goretti, if you could just start again. I can't hear you yet. I don't think anyone can hear.
Can you hear me now?
There, you're coming through now, yeah.
Okay, great. Is it trickling down, right? Is it coming down to on the ground in terms of commitment to by the employers? I think there are a lot of companies that are starting to implement some policies around ethical recruitment or make commitments, definitely commitments to that from their suppliers, starting to trickle down. So certain clients have sought us out because of our values, because of how we run our business and the focus that we do, not only on ethical recruitment, but ethical employment, because you do have to have both hand in hand. But I think the challenge is going to be continued collaboration among all businesses, all NOGs, different agencies, different advocacy groups, actually, and businesses, governments coming together and advocating and advancing that commitment. I think that companies are starting to realize that this is essential. This is something that you need to be doing. And it is beneficial for your employees, for your clients, and for the overall health and welfare of everyone, including your business. But I think that a continued collaboration is going to be needed. And I think that's when groups like AAALP will come in order to get that through. I'm also in California, part of the board of the California Farm Labor Contractors Association. And that's something that as a board member and for our members, we try to educate and implement the farm labor contractors that we have as members. So I think just continued education and collaboration amongst the industry is what, but we are starting to see it.
Thanks, Greti. And Pranay, your experience in Nepal?
Well, in terms of adoption of responsible recruitment is concerned, I should say there has been some progress. The positive thing is there is a widespread acknowledgement of the need for responsible recruitment, and it is discussed more widely than in the past. We have been coming across employers who are abiding employee pay model for the first time, and this transition is encouraging. However, having said this, adoption has been uneven across sectors and companies, which means we still need to turn down unethical recruitment drives. So one of the challenge we are facing is that when there are media exposures, research demonstrating malpractices and non-adherence of employee pays model and other labor practices, there is a risk of market being closed down for migrants of that particular nationality. However, we feel that it would be good if clients did not disengage from the sourcing countries and instead considered the responsible recruiter for this recruitment drives. Because the closure of the market hampers all stakeholders, especially the migrant workers, right? Because they lose the job opportunities. This is where we believe that due diligence and responsible recruitment standards can be very useful and handy. So, thank you.
Thanks, Pranay. And that was, I think, a really important point that you just made there, Pranay, which I certainly will take a note of. Veronica, slightly different question for you, but building on that. The business case to adopting responsible recruitment business models needs to be clear and strong for recruiters and labour providers like Ag-Socio and International Manpower Recruitment. How do you think this can be achieved?
Yeah. So I think that we can talk, the business case is there. There are many reasons, and we've talked about it over the past 2 days as to why responsible recruitment is good for workers, it's good for businesses. But I think we can also, and at least talking about U.S. agriculture, we can talk about the supply and the demand of responsible recruitment and fair labor practices. So since Stronger Together, for example, started in 2019 in the US, we've been working across the labor supply chain with businesses to increase the supply and demand for responsible recruitment. In some cases, that's been increasing the demand by education and awareness raising, and increasing supply by capacity building with businesses. And we are starting to see that growth in the supply and the demand, but it's not a linear process, it's circular. So as we start seeing the demand in the US for responsible recruitment in agriculture, and we're starting to see some businesses that are able to supply workers in a responsible way, then the loop has to be closed. So then businesses need to engage with these businesses, these ag labor providers that are doing the right thing, that are demonstrating responsible recruitment practices, that are leading the way, that are kind of really don't necessarily have the incentives, business incentives, but they're still willing to get out there and do, take a risk. And so there needs to be some sort of recognition of their efforts. So as we've said, we've got IMP here, Ag-Socio, Cierto's in the room and spoke earlier. Ag-Socio and Cierto are Clearview certified. And so it's then saying, we can identify some of these good players. So let's make sure that they continue to be incentivized and that also others see see the progress that they're making and that they're leading the way and that they can follow in those footsteps. And then just kind of tying it back to triple ALP and how triple ALP will scale. And I've already mentioned a little bit about scaling the professionalization and through education. And I am going to just kind of read this, and I apologize because it is our business theory of how to scale. And that is that if there are affordable pathways for labor providers to adopt responsible recruitment, and they have access to good training, and they stand out in the market, and then they're supported by growers and businesses, then FLCs will be incentivized to adopt and demonstrate responsible recruitment, which will then create a market that prioritizes responsible recruitment, and ultimately it makes for better working conditions for our agricultural workers, which are at the heart of what we're trying to do.
You read that? It took you about 30 seconds to read it. I completely agree with it, but achieving it is proving quite challenging. But essentially it's an ability to recognize that a business is doing the right thing, and for that business to be recognized by its commercial partners to benefit from that. Okay, going to the recognition part and coming back to you, Goretti and Pranay, both of your businesses, and Veronica spoke about Clearview, but both of your businesses have been through responsible recruitment certification. I'd like to just hear from you what the benefits of certification and the challenges of certification have been to your businesses, and whether you think certification actually is a model that can be rolled out at scale. A certification for responsible recruitment is something that can be rolled out at scale. Goretti, if you could go first on that one, please.
Okay, what are the benefits? I think for us, it's a great way to test our compliance and audit readiness. Having an experienced auditor review our records, field practices, interview workers while the stakes are low, and in a situation under control will show our gaps or showed our gaps in the process before fines and other problems are on the line. And it's also a strong signal to our team at all levels that we want to run a professional operation, and that we're willing to open the doors to external groups to review and make recommendations for improvements, because you can always improve. Also, it's a signal to our customers that we're making an investment in compliance and systems that protect them from legal, financial, and reputational risk. Now, going to challenges. It can be expensive. And then no customer is going to pay you more for it. You need to get the value for your own business. So another thing, it can be time consuming. There's multiple days to take staff time to prepare and then host the auditor. Sometimes there'll be follow-up work after, but I think the investment in time is worth it. Also, the auditor quality varies, and some are better than others. We've had auditors that work all over the world and who we have learned a lot from. But we've also had auditors who are underprepared and need to be guided, especially here in California. Let's see. Now, the second question, can I drive best practice at scale? I think third-party certifications are a good tool to verify practices in the supply chain. I think if buyers demand these audits, they can drive change through a larger adoption. Looking ahead, what was the second part? What do I believe are the most significant levers? Or no, I think that's it. That's the question. I'm sorry. Did I answer both parts, David?
Same question, Pranay. Your business has been through certification. What were the benefits and challenges to your business, and do you think certification is something that can be rolled out at scale across the industry?
Yes, the benefits and the challenges of certification is, well, one of the benefits is going through the rigorous process as required by the audit proceedings of responsible recruitment certification. It gives us the opportunity to step back and organize our company policies, standards, records better. In addition, certificate by internationally accredited institutions, it lends a credibility in the recruitment landscape, especially among clients who may not be familiar with IMR's work or sourcing from Nepal. And when I talk about the challenges, yes, responsible recruitment certifications have not been recognized as a core indicator in the sourcing strategies of the hiring companies. But we are seeing the change, and hope this will get momentum in the coming days. Yes, responsible recruitment can be scaled up if a critical mass of companies make it a mandatory of the certifications in their due diligence process. It is also important that the stakeholders in the recruitment landscape should support certified companies as to demonstrate this business model a success for other in the recruitment industry to follow.
Thank you. Pranay. I guess it's about 5 years now that reasonably sophisticated responsible recruitment certification schemes have been operating, and what we seem to be seeing is that there's a fairly limited take-up of them. That because the recruitment and supply process is complex, that they are long audits and they're expensive audits, and I'm not seeing a market take-up for the certification system. So, Veronica, sort of a long lead into sort of what other business initiatives, or how can business initiatives and trade associations like the AAALP contribute to a much bigger scaling in countries, particularly in countries where there's limited legislation in this space. But there are market initiatives like the Ethical Charter. So how can other initiatives help?
So I think with government and advocacy groups, they have such an important role to play in kind of pulling out issues, identifying situations, negative situations, addressing unscrupulous operators. I mean, I've talked a little bit about, maybe operators that don't have the capacity or haven't been educated in, this and that. But of course, there are unscrupulous operators out there that are doing things intentionally in a way that is bad for workers. And so that's kind of the role of government and advocacy groups to a degree, the kind of enforcement when there are violations, but that's very limited in the US. So I think the role of business initiatives like ESIP, which you've mentioned, or Stronger Togethers and our collaborative programs, or what we're trying to do with AAALP, the difference is that we're not trying to look for kind of the bad actors, or we're trying to really identify those that want to do right by their business and by workers. So it's a little bit more of a carrot approach than a stick approach. And I think that that's what we're seeing at least within the, the U.S. agricultural industry, these programs and initiatives that are more about building the capacity of the labor providers, really helping them try to understand, what they have to comply in, what is beyond compliance. So for AAALP, it is hopefully going to be a go-to place for all of these questions, for the capacity, for the training. But it's also going to be a place that will offer self-assessments. We know that that's not the solution, but it will have also verification options, and for those that really kind of want to go to that gold standard, Clearview. So we're going to be offering a number, many service levels for the members. I mean, there will be minimum requirements to become a member that they have to adhere to, and things that they will have to demonstrate. But we are, in a way, trying to kind of level everyone up to at least have some baseline that doesn't exist right now, with the exception of a couple of states that we've talked about, and California, for example, being one of them. So we hope that this will be a catalyst for motivating and attracting really the labor providers that want to stand out in the market and that are looking for guidance. They're looking for networks, and hopefully this will also eventually, businesses will look to AAALP and say, well, who are your members? And if you are a member of AAALP, you've been able to demonstrate, this level of compliance and commitment to responsible recruitment and fair labor practices, and and it's a way for businesses to know who these actors are that are committed to responsible recruitment and to their workforce.
Thanks, Veronica. Greti and Pranay, I'm going to stay in this theme, and I'm going to stay looking to the future, and I'm going to ask you both, starting with Greti, sort of looking at the future in the market that you operate in. What do you believe are going to be the most significant levers and the most critical drivers so that there are more and more and more businesses demanding responsible recruitment, and so many more businesses who are putting responsible recruitment as their way of doing business in the industry you work in? What are going to be the biggest things that are going to have to happen to drive that?
Who do you want to go first? I'll go.
Greti, you first, please.
Thank you. We think that greater awareness of the problem by the people in the supply chain is very necessary. If you look at what the industry has accomplished, being the ag industry, with food safety, you can see how field practices could be impacted when something is a priority for buyers and brands. That's going to be the driving force. So that'd be my answer.
In the market that you compete in, what do you believe are the most significant levers and the critical drivers that are going to make responsible recruitment more scaled and more widely embedded amongst your competitors and the other in the industry that you work in?
Are you asking me, right?
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay, there was this audio problem in between, but that's okay now. Yes, like I said earlier on, we have come across employers that are increasingly adopting employer-based model, which is very encouraging. We discuss about good practices in platforms such as today. that allows stakeholders engagement and dialogues that help. These policies and dialogues that are happening at headquarter level should actually translate to the implementation at forum member companies, supply chain players, and franchisee in the destination countries where the migrants work. So basically meaning the policies and standards of ethical recruitment should be implemented at destination countries where migrants work, and not just at the headquarter level. Thank you.
One last question before we see if there are any other questions that have come through. So there are many supply chain partners in the room here and many more online. And this may be, and this is probably a repeat of something you've already said before, but I want one message to come out from each of you to the supply chain. What is the one message that you would convey to the supply chain partners about what they can do to best support uptake of responsible recruitment at scale? So a nice clear point. Goretti, I'm going to go with you first.
Thank you, David. I think that the message is you should understand the risk factors with agricultural labor and do some basic due diligence. You should influence customers, asking the right questions that make operators question who they are for labor or how they operate. FLCs, farm labor contractors or labor providers, are the primary method of employment for ag workers in California and other states. Do you know who your FLCs are in your supply chain? Are they licensed? Are they insured? If they use the H-2A or the H-2B visa programs, how do they recruit? What does their HR and housing support program look like? What kind of vehicles are used to transport workers, and are they safe? Those are the kind of things, and that's the message that I would like to present. Thank you.
Your one message?
I think there's some audio, Pranay.
Pranay,
yes,
what would be the one message that you would like to give to your supply chain partners to convey how they can best support uptake of responsible recruitment at scale?
Well, what I'd like to add here is responsible recruitment allows for more space to maximize the benefits of migration. And with that, we've taken an advantage by taking our responsible recruitment a step further, by making ethical recruitment more accessible to the poorest, such as marginalized communities in Nepal, or even recruiting earthquake victims to help them recover from the devastation. So my message would be, like, I would urge from international manpower recruitment to all our clients and supply companies to work with us to redefine the social responsibility by designing recruitment drives that can help elevate poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranay. That's a very powerful point. That's a very new and interesting concept for me. Veronica, what message would you give?
I think this ties maybe a little bit to what Goretti has already said about asking questions. But it's, and this has been said in a couple of sessions already, but just communication, communicate up and down your supply chain, communicate your commitments. I mean, if you're committed to responsible recruitment, put that front and center. You know, if you're committed to human rights, put that front and center, up and down the supply chain. You know, communicate your expectations, and communicate those market signals. So going back to the supply and demand, you know, close the loop and have suppliers have those clear market signals to the businesses that are trying to lead the way. And also, we've all said collaboration, but I have to say it again because collaboration really is communication. It leads to consistency. It can only really have positive outcomes if it's done in the right spirit.
Fabulous. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Pranay. Thank you, Goretti. I'm going to pass over to questions now, if we have any. There always seems to be questions, so...
Yes, you have questions.
Good.
So would you like to have them all at once or at different rounds?
Pick the best one first.
Okay, well, they're all good.
All right.
So there's one... So the idea of getting rid of brokers has been floated by some as the way for responsible recruitment to happen.
Yeah.
So, but what can the industry itself do to collaborate to improve the reputation of the industry? So that's one interesting one that came. And the other one is, we ended yesterday with a panel on women migrant workers. So what can recruiters do to make sure that in the process of recruitment, the rights of women migrant workers are better protected?
Great. Going to take that as two questions.
Okay.
Going to take the second one first.
Okay.
Interested to hear Pranay and Goretti, whether that is something that you already do, which is how do you protect the rights of women workers, whether you put a gender lens on your recruitment process, and if not, whether that's something that you might consider in the future. So a question in three parts for you. I'll start with Goretti.
So we've made a commitment to, because most employers, most farm labor contractors do have a gender lens. They like to recruit men first and foremost and majority, but we've made a commitment to diversify that. It is complicated with the housing requirements, finding housing suitable for the health and welfare and safety of all genders, and with the regulations surrounding it. But we managed and we're committed to scaling up the diversification of gender. How do we protect our rights? It starts from the very beginning, right? Responsible recruitment. Our partners they have many human rights advocates in their businesses and incorporated in their business and in their model. So we work with them closely, and but it extends into the actual employment, right? Putting together our best practices, putting together a leadership team that includes both genders, diversified in many different job skills. So we have a leadership team that shows the dynamic and the diversification of our workforce, giving them a voice, meeting with them on a regular basis, and following through with those meetings and what comes out of them. So that's what we've tried to do, and we're doing now.
Pranay?
When we are talking about women migrants, what we got to be mindful of the fact is, unlike men, the reason that a woman would migrate would be of many concerns. Especially, they could be running away from the marriage. They could be running away from other reasons as to on the path that they choose to migrate. So, having to when we know of all these facts, we are more mindful of the fact that there could be many multi-layer reasons of a lady getting migrated to the foreign country. So in that sense, we are very particular by having to do our SAQ on the part of after post-deployment of the migrants in certain particular companies, and we also make it a point that during the process of due diligence, we make it a point to have an on-site visit as to check whether the facilities for female migrant workers are being the rights are reserved and the rights are being protected or not.
Thank you, Pranay. The second question I'm going to ask you to think about, Veronica, more than just think about. I'm going to ask you to give your answer. It's the suggestion was one of the proposals was let's outlaw labour brokers. That's one option. Or the other proposal was, if not, how do you improve the standards in those businesses? So pretty straightforward question, if you could.
Yeah, I think it's a, I mean, this is not a new proposal in U.S. ag. You know, there are, you know, schools of thought that say, you know, get rid of ag labor providers, farm labor, cut out the middle person. That reduces, you know, layers. It increases transparency. Let's do this direct hire. Maybe in an ideal world that would work, but as we, you know, mentioned before, domestic labor is not available in the U.S., and so we are relying on migrant workers for our food production, and producers, farmers are not in the business of recruiting, and the H-2A visa system is extremely complex, and so there just isn't that capacity. That's just not a reality. And as the H-2A visa program grows and there's a more reliance on migrant labor, it's just not a reality that the labor broker can be cut out for everyone. I mean, there are some that do engage in direct hire. So the solution is due diligence, work with responsible labor providers and recruiters, and then you will, you know, mitigate those risks.
Certainly, my experience is that they exist in every market, in every country, even when they're outlawed. And the standards tend to be worse when you are not even legitimately allowed to have that business model, because it's completely uncontrolled, it's completely unregulated, and it's completely under the
Didn't have a criminal
element. Absolutely. So professionalization, regularization, training, standards, incorporating within the standards in supply chain due diligence is, in my experience, the only way that you improve standards. And as both our guests have said, recognition of those businesses that do it well. I think we've got time for one more question.
David, can I add something real quick to that last question? Broker?
So the last question is also a pat for Pranay for the work that he has done from the audience. And I think that follows up quite well with what you said about recognition, you know, so we can pull each other up in the industry. And the next one is about Malaysia's upcoming bar on overseas recruitment. And perhaps, Pranay, you can talk to us about, do you see that as impacting your business? Is that a market you're exploring or send to? And yes.
Pranay, did you hear that?
I didn't quite get it. Would you repeat the question, please?
We just need a second for your audio to come out over here.
Mm-hmm. May I get the question again, please?
Was firstly a recognition for yourself and for those businesses from the room and from the person providing the question about businesses such as yours that do put ethical recruitment, responsible recruitment at that core. So that was the opening, but it was also a question about how the forthcoming bar in Malaysia on overseas recruitment, how you think that will impact your business and indeed wider recruitment from Nepal.
Yes, I should say the ban of or the suspension of migrant intake in Malaysia has hit us very hard. I must tell you the truth. And that's one of the reasons that we are looking for diversifying our business, as I said earlier on. And we are looking for opportunities. We are looking at other corridors to sustain ourselves. And that is also one of the reasons that I told in one of my answers to the questions, that the policies and then the policies of ethical recruitment should not be on the headquarter level, but on the destination countries where the migrants work. It could be in different various corridors. So yes, it has affected, and then we are looking at corridors. We are looking for opportunities by having to explore to some of the major employers in the UK and in the Middle East as well.
Couple of last comments. Firstly, to thank Pranay and Goretti for having this both at the extremes of your day. It's very much appreciated. Your contribution is very much valued. And thank you, Veronica, for your contributions as well. I thought as you got older, you became more mellow and more patient. You don't. You become more impatient because you have less time. And time becomes a very valuable commodity, and you appreciate it. And I get frustrated about the lack of progress, about the slowness of progress. But then I take a reflection, and I think about when I started working in this space. The term responsible recruitment didn't even exist. It wasn't a term that was ever used. And now the understanding of responsible recruitment, the understanding of the need to address that to achieve decent human rights due diligence management in supply chains is centre and core to the work we do. We've got a long, long way to go. We all know that. I think we now have really sound foundations. The drivers for change are coming, and I think we will see an acceleration towards due diligence over the coming years. If we don't, I'm going to blame all of you lot, okay? All right, so thank you for everything. I am positive for the future. We will continue to improve, and thank you for organisations such as the IHRB for making terms like the employer pays principle something that we all understand. Thank you for SEDEX for putting it into their labour standards. I know that will make a significant change. Thank you for all of you, indeed, who contribute to that change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if we follow David's Glastonbury analogy, the people I'm left with are not the ones who are stumbling away to their tents. They're going to stick it out till the very end. So that's great. Thank you for sticking with us. I wanted us to just be joined by representatives from our three constituencies. We started the forum with business, civil society and Sadiq, migrant worker himself, and we wanted to finish there. Unfortunately, Rachel can't be with us this afternoon, so Louise has kindly stepped in and is going to represent all businesses in the world, and I think that she's more than capable of doing that. And really, the whole point of this little session was just to get some reflections from those three really important stakeholder constituencies about what they've heard over the last 2 days, what they felt was missing, and what they would like to see going forward. So. Louise, you represent an organisation that in turn represents, I think it was 50-odd businesses, and you're very experienced around this agenda, we know, and how business will view some of the things that we've looked at. So what are your key reflections from what you've heard at the forum?
Lovely, thank you, Neil. And yeah, my picture's not up there, so I have definitely been asked to stand in, but luckily I have lots of friends in the room who I won't point and credit to, but who've helped me with my closing remarks in the last half an hour, which is great. I'm going to start where David ended, which we hadn't planned, but was rather lovely. So Rachel asked the question at the beginning in the opening remarks about why are we not making more progress. My real reflection over the last 2 days is, which I think was similar to what David's saying, there's so much going on in different areas, and those that know me, like I think there's so much going on to be really proud of. Those that know me know that I like to bring it all together and get people to share more, and I like us all to think about what have we learned and how can we take like an action forward. But I really think that is what it's all about. It's about us, taking what we've learned and heard over the last 2 days and doing more with it. So would encourage everyone to do that. I think though, some more kind of specific points I wanted to make. I think reflecting that, I'd like us, we need to start in our reflections where we started 2 days ago with what Sumita gave us in terms of the migrant worker perspective. So we have to think about this is more than recruitment fees. This is about the full worker journey. This is about other forced labour indicators, whether that's about accommodation, withheld wages, treatment, etc. And the other thing that's come out really loudly for me is we need to really prioritise vulnerable migrant workers. So whether that's those that are heavily in debt or considering the gender element, the women workers. I think then for the business stakeholders in the room and online, a real reflection that we need to look internally and think about for retailers and brands, how do we factor in the true cost of recruitment? I think James said in one of the panels, it's all about the money when we're talking about recruitment fees. It's definitely all about the money, it's also all about the resources, but I think we need to have some more honest conversations about that. And further to that, we've had some really excellent examples from Equinor and from others about how do you upskill people outside of, the constituents in the room around responsible recruitment? How do you embed EPP from the beginning of the supplier relationship? How do you drive better practice with procurement teams and more engagement from the start of supplier relationships? I think we've done a lot of reflecting on the changes that the new legislation will drive. I think that's going to drive us all more towards the UNGPs, which is where we should be, away from just using social audits as a tool, and that's positive, even if social audits do have a role. Another reflection about stakeholders is I think we've heard over the last 2 days so many amazing examples from suppliers, from labour providers, a real willingness to be open, the panel you've just heard from, a real willingness to be open about the challenges and to share good practice. And we need more of that. We need those kind of constituents to be encouraged by market demand, to be encouraged by capacity building and investment, and we need rewards for those people who are engaged, people who are willing and organisations that are willing to go above and beyond the legal requirements. We need to see them being rewarded with more business, and that's the kind of basics. Again, for the brands and retailers, for our constituents, my constituents, I think we need to double back on the common messages, on the convergence piece, not making this super complicated, trying to drive common messages to suppliers. And I think there's an element that's running through about antitrust and how we use that and break that down and really try and understand within the confines of antitrust, how do we drive more collaboration. And the final reflection, and I've said this to several people, I've barely drunk water over the last 2 days or coffee. I keep thinking I'm so thirsty, and that's not a criticism of the Clifford Chance catering, which has been amazing, but there's just been so many people to talk to, and you kind of don't want to lose that moment. You know, you don't have enough time to go to the toilet or drink because you don't want to miss that opportunity to talk to people. And I think that's a real reflection of the value of these events. So thank you to IHRB for letting us be part of it.
Thanks, Louise. That's great. That's nice reflection. So, Samitha, we've just heard from a business point of view there, but of course it's really important that part of the stakeholder group collaborating on this is civil society. When we started 2 days ago, you were explaining to us the benefits to business of doing that. But what have you heard and what are you going to take away?
I think the interesting part about the conversations that we had in these 2 days was the reiterating the role of the companies, be it looking after the welfare of the workers, sustainable engagement with stakeholders, and also collaboration with government. And I think one of the very, very important points that came out and many of the panels actually repeated was the shared responsibility. And I think that is key, and also collaboration with stakeholders. And I think that comes to the fact that we all need to work together to find the right solution. We can't work in silos or in isolation and expect results. So, and then I think I really liked the panel on the women issue. In many conferences that we go, women issue is just in one of the topics, but it's not a standalone panel, and I hope in the future IHRB conferences, we do have such a panel, because it's such an important topic to talk about women migration. And then migrant in conflict-affected countries. I think this is the first time I'm hearing about the motivation and the reasons why migrants are actually migrating to conflict areas. We only talk about the problems that the migrants face in those kind of areas, but this is the first time. I thought that information that they shared was so important. And I also felt that this is a conversation we must continue having, because I think in future we will be seeing a lot of migrants going into conflict areas, and what can we do about that? And also about workers who are leaving conflict areas, like the Myanmar issue. I think that was also a very good conversation to have. And what was missing, or rather not what was missing, but I think conversations that we can have is on children at work and child labor. That is one. I think that's a very, very important point, especially in Asian context. I know that there's some conflict in terms of whether what kind of child labor we're talking about, or whether we should allow children at work. So that's a conversation that we should have in future. Refugee workforce. That hasn't been really coming out strong, but I think that is something that we really need to look about, because especially in countries like Malaysia, Thailand, where we have a large number of refugees, we really need to talk about refugee workforce. We are not against refugees coming into the workforce. That is a good way forward, but I think that when refugees come into the workforce, they are not given the rights as a migrant worker. They don't get the social security, they don't get the work permits and things like that. So that conversation should start, because a lot of the companies that we see in Malaysia and Thailand, they take in refugees as a CSR program, rather than a proper workforce, and that a population that needs work rights. And then there's another conversation I thought that we could have in future was the aftermath of remediation. I think there was a passing remark about the risk of companies who do remediation and how they can cope thereafter. But I think that conversation needs to happen, and also sustaining the employer pay model. So once they go through the remediation, they adopt the model, how do they sustain it? And that needs to be discussed as well. Finally, I thought skill recognition and certification is also something that possibly is a discussion that we should have in future.
That's another fantastic list of different subjects as well. I can assure you that the women migrant workers piece is absolutely going to be a bigger part of the IHB migrant workers program going forward, and you know that you and I have got some plans for some of the things that we can do on that. I'm going to turn to, so thank you Samitha for that, civil society. I'm going to turn to Sudeep now. Sudeep, thank you for waiting patiently, and thank you for giving up so much of your time to sort of pay attention to some of the things that were going on here in London. But Sudeep, of the things that you've been able to listen to and the things that you've heard, what do you think are significant? And the same to you, what do you hope that people will take away from what they've learned at the forum?
I'd like to really appreciate GFFR for being one of the global platform which is dedicated to address the migrant workers and promoting the responsible recruitment. From this forum, personally, I have empowered myself, and then it really helped me to, for an individual as well as an organization, Shramik Sanjal, really grateful and impactful about the work being done. From the session that I attended in past 2 days, I really love the fact that how the forum and the panelists were able to give the deep exploration about the challenges the migrant workers are facing. I must say that many of the challenges were addressed throughout the panel. And another thing is the invaluable insight which every panelist presented that could be that can be with the best practices what they have followed about the responsible recruitment. I really like the fact that the register which was shared in the beginning of the panel. So these are the best practices what encourage others to follow the responsible recruitment practices. And then as a migrant workers, it gives us more security that the things are happening around. So it gives us more confidence. And then the challenge is what was highlighted throughout the sessions, that that could be with the passport confiscation, that could be with the financial problems, that could be with the violation of the rights. Every challenge is what as a migrant worker we are facing, that was highlighting during the conversation. So that really gave me the confidence that yes, the things are going on a right track. And as earlier mentioned, the panel about the panel which was completely dedicated for the woman migrant worker, that is something that it really was a highlight of the session, because as she rightly mentioned earlier, that I have never seen any of the forum which is having the panel which is completely dedicated to the migrant worker. We as a migrant worker, being a female migrant worker, it's that already gives 3 times of more vulnerability, I mean, and then the more challenges they are facing. So that is really a good thing. So I really appreciate the fact the session on the panels were really well crafted, and the input, the output of the panels was really great. The only thing what I would love as a migrant worker to see in the future is maybe we could have a little bit of discussion about the reintegration of the migrant workers. There was the touchwood of the things, but if we could have panel discussing on that, because that is something that it will give more confidence for the that will then cover the 360-degree circle of the migration, because reintegration for the migrant worker is one of the biggest challenge. And another thing is we could be more inclusive, when drafting the policy for the migrant workers, because we have always let the migrant worker as a vulnerable community, but then if we do not empower, then if we do not include them in the decision-making process, they will never get the confidence. So to build up the confidence, to get more ground reality, so if we could include migrant workers in the decision-making process, in the policy drafting process, that will give the more human value on the policy. So I think those are my key takeaways from the forum. Yeah. And I just want to add a point saying that stopping the migration is not a solution, because migration is rather an opportunity to control the unemployment, to include the financial sustainability, because many of the families are relying on migration, but the fact is it should not cost in the expense of the human life or the human dignity. So that is something that I wanted to highlight at the end. Thank you, Neil.
That's great. Thank you. Oh, I'm getting a bit of an echo. Thank you very much, Sudeep. That's great. And as you know, we're big supporters of Shamit Sanjal, and want very much to work closer with you and see you succeed. It's always been one of our most important civil society relationships. And I think that the point you make about reintegration is really important. The DACA principles are designed as a migration cycle, and that starts with recruitment, onto employment, and then onto safe return. And I think that there's always a lot of talk about remittances and the value that migrant workers add to countries of destination, but also countries of origin through their remittances. But it can't just be financial. We need to also consider the sort of social richness that migrant workers contribute to the countries where they're working, if they're allowed to, and back home. What are these skills? What are these experiences? And how are their countries of origin tapping into those beyond a simple financial bargain that they're striking with their migrant workers? So Sudeep, thank you very much. And we're really sorry that you couldn't be here, as we've said many times. I'm going to take advantage, because I'm sitting here and I've got some things that I've been reflecting on as I listen to the things that people are talking about. And the thing that I have just started to hear a little bit, and maybe I'm a bit more tuned into it now because it's something that IHRB are starting to really appreciate is going to be very significant, and that we want to start doing some more work on, is around demographic change. We've got ageing populations in the north, all the way across Europe, all the way across North Asia, all the way across North America in particular. We've got this ageing population. People are living a lot longer. They are going to be requiring more care. The care sector is going to expand exponentially, and this isn't generally something that is going to be subject to automation unless they come up with some very, very good robots. These people are going to need to be taken care of for much longer. This will also come at a time of shrinking native workforces in many of the countries that we're talking about. I was at an event the other day that the IOM put on, and the native workforce population of Italy is going to be 50% less by the year 2050. These are really, really significant facts, and you can take that right the way across much of Northern Europe and North America and North Asia as well. So we're going to see a need for workforces, for migrant workforces, in all of these countries to take care of the old and the sick and the elderly, but also to maintain economic vitality, to provide the taxes that will pay to care for these populations. It seems to us that this is something that's not being talked about quite enough. We had labour mobility partnerships begin to talk about this at the Global Forum last year, but I think it's the area where we all need to be thinking about it. Everyone thinks it's going to be climate change that will cause the big migration flows. I think that there definitely will be migration flows due to climate change, but I think that this is something else that we need to be considering, and we also then need to set that against current attitudes around migrants and migration and migrant workers. And we are seeing elections right the way across the place, and migration is the hot topic, but it's being talked about in a way that will not be conducive to new flows of migrant workers everywhere. So I think that there's a lot of debate around this, and there's a role for business, civil society and migrant workers themselves in that. So sorry, that's my taking advantage. And so thank you very much to my panel. You don't need, you can absolutely stay there, that's fine. But I just want to bring things to a close now. And it's the end of our 7th Global Forum for Responsible Recruitment. That's why I've got no hair. You know, it just involves a load of thank yous, as always. Thank you in particular to Louise, Samitha and Sudeep for those reflections. And then other thank yous. Thank you to our partners from AIM Progress, so thank you again, Louise. And from Stronger Together, Jantine, that's Hannah there. I can't see Jantine, where's she? Jantine, right in the front, sorry. Thank you. It's great partnering with you. It's just really easy. We all, well, I hope we do, we all get on well, and it just makes life so much easier to be working with great partners. Thank you to Clifford Chance, who've hosted us again so graciously here in London. And, you know, we don't take that lightly. It really is appreciated. And it's been great, and you've looked after us so well. Thank you to the Walmart Foundation for their generous support for this forum and the work that we do. And thank you in particular to all the session moderators who worked with us to ensure the liveliest and most informative discussions possible. And then, of course, thank you to the speakers, some of whom travel from abroad, especially to be here, and all those online. I particularly want to go back to Sudeep, actually. I want to call out Sudeep in the Gulf, who's given up his hard-earned leave time to join the forum. This is his own time that he's given up. And we wanted so much to have you here in person, Sudeep. And it was a great disappointment to us all, and I know it was to you, that we just couldn't get the visa through for you, and it just didn't work out. But can we just give Sudeep a round of applause? Thank you to our online event management company, We and Goliath, who, working with the Clifford Chance team here, enable us to have an online experience. I've got written here, it looks easy. It didn't always look easy, actually. But when you think about what it must be like to be trying to beam people in from around the world and then beam the whole thing back out, and we've got this online audience ranging over 2,000 people watching in different parts, different sessions and things like that. And of course, all the sessions are recorded and they'll all end up as YouTube videos now. So particular thanks to Jake and Michael from Clifford Chance and their team in the AV unit at the back. Thank you to our good friend Miss Bonnie Ling, who once again has made the task of being question master seem like the most exciting job in the world. And thank you to all the IHRB staff, many of whom found reasons to be in London this week so they could attend and be part of things. Special thanks as well to the IHRB migrant workers team. So I have Rakesh in Delhi and Guna in Singapore, who, although are not here, have been working and are an integral part of everything going on in the background. So there's all this going on behind. And finally, I have to thank the one person without whom the Global Forum simply wouldn't happen. Carmen Pedraza, come on, stand up. Carmen. You work tirelessly on this event, and you bring all the different elements together. You help us understand the technical side of things, and you produce all the graphics and social media. You help us tie everything up, and that needs to go on stage. And with that delivery to over 2,000 people globally, you work so hard, and once again have helped deliver a really significant event. I'm sure you're going to go back to Paris now and sleep for a fortnight. Yeah. So this is the end of the forum, and perhaps before we go, we should also thank some other people. And this is the migrant workforce that enables us to live the lives that we do. 1 in 20 workers is a migrant worker. And as we sit here today, let us perhaps consider how they've enabled that. The roads and railways we took to get here, the clothes we're wearing, the food we had at lunch, and the computers that we take our notes on, and I'm sure the cleaning staff who will be in here tonight. And so this list goes on and on and on. In all of these ways, our lives are not just touched, but intricately bound up in the lives of migrant workers. IHRB are a human rights organisation, and sometimes it's easy for us to get caught up in conventions and legislation and company processes and funding rounds and programs and initiatives, etc., etc. All of that's really important, but as well as that, we should not forget the real people at the heart of this work, migrant workers. A former colleague told a story about he once asked a migrant worker what it was he wanted. He was told, "The way they treat me is not very dignified. I'm a grown man with a family who I work hard to support. The way they treat us is not right. I just want to be treated with dignity and respect." Now, dignity is a word that we use a lot within our programme. It's the human part of human rights, that rights are necessary for dignity to exist. When we think or use the word dignity, however, we should perhaps also think of individual agency, ambition, hopes and dreams, the quiet assertion of these things that are contained within it. That very human part of life, which, as that worker said, is about expecting to be treated with dignity and respect. That's why it's at the very heart of our foundational document, the Dhaka Principles for Migration with Dignity. And as this forum has once more affirmed, that needs to begin with responsible recruitment. So thank you all very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.